What if the reason we see Andrew Tate everywhere is not because society is getting worse, but because it is growing and the old guard is just fighting to survive? And what if Andrew Tate isn't the future of masculinity, but just a withdrawal symptom of masculinity evolving way too fast? Last week, Andrew Tate lost a boxing match to Chase Damore and then released a really long video response explaining why the loss did not matter. The internet reacted exactly as you thought it would. He lost a lot of fans that worshipped him, and everyone else loved watching his downfall. But for my channel, I want to take a different approach because when you look at Andrew Tate through the lens of spiral dynamics, he stops being a culture war character and starts becoming something far more interesting. He becomes a signal telling us where our human development is currently heading. So before we start talking about Andrew Tate, let me give you a shared map so we can make sure we're all in alignment with the language that I'm using. Spiral dynamics is a framework that explains how human values, identity, and meaning-making evolve in response to life conditions. You see, people aren't just disagreeing about their opinions, they're experiencing reality through entirely different internal lenses. Each stage of consciousness defines strength, success, morality, truth, and even God differently. None of these stages are good or bad, they are just adaptive responses to survival and meaning. Spiral dynamics helps us stop asking who is right and starts asking a way better question. What stage of consciousness is currently speaking? And if you want the full foundation, watch my spiral dynamics overview video and then come back to this one. This episode is about the application of those stages. And this channel, I called it the Rainbow Pill Project because the goal is to not tell you what to believe. The goal is to help you understand why people experience the same world so differently. We're going to analyze current events, cultural figures, and controversial moments through spiral dynamics so that we could see why reactions are so intense, why conversations collapse, and why people feel like they are living in different realities. Reality is subjective, but it isn't random. It is structured by our consciousness. And when you understand the stages, outrage makes more sense, devotion makes more sense, fear makes more sense, and blind spots make way more sense. And since I just started this channel, it grows through thoughtful conversation rather than just triggering outrage. And if this lens resonates with you, subscribing, commenting, or even respectfully disagreeing genuinely helps this work reach more people who want depth instead of dopamine hits. So let's jump into Andrew Tate. To understand Andrew Tate, you cannot just analyze his personality or his messaging. You have to look at the developmental environment that produced someone like him. So over the last 50 years, many Western societies moved rapidly away from traditional blue stage structures. Clear gender roles, hierarchy, discipline, and moral authority were all questioned and often dismantled. And at the same time, green stage values like empathy, emotional awareness, inclusivity, and equality rose very, very quickly, especially in mainstream media, education, and all of our cultural institutions. And while this shift created real progress, it also created a developmental gap. Spiral dynamics shows that the stages must be integrated sequentially. When a stage is bypassed or prematurely suppressed, it doesn't just disappear, it goes underground and later reemerges in exaggerated or distorted forms, much like the masculinity that Andrew Tate tries to sell. For many of the men and young boys out there, red stage development never completed in a healthy way. And the red stage is where agency, self-assertion, anger, competitiveness, and boundary setting are all learned. It is where a person discovers that they can act and be assertive in the world instead of just adapting to the changing needs of the world. Instead of being integrated, red traits were often labeled toxic or dangerous without offering healthy alternatives. Anger became something to suppress rather than something that you regulated, and strength became something to apologize for rather than to embody responsibly, and competition became something that you would be shamed for rather than a celebration of skill. And when this happens, red does not mature. It just stagnates and it gets angry and feels mistreated and wants revenge. People like Andrew Tate appear as a knee-jerk response to this type of stagnation. He provides certainty in a world that feels ambiguous, he offers hierarchy in a culture that dissolved it without replacing it, and then he frames life as a battle with clear winners and losers, which feels very stabilizing and comforting to nervous systems overwhelmed by this sudden shift in society. And this is why his message resonates most with incels, people who feel humiliated, invisible, or disempowered. Research on radicalization and authoritarian attraction consistently shows that perceived status loss and social humiliation are stronger predictors of attraction to dominance-based ideologies than the ideology itself. And Andrew Tate did not invent these feelings. He organized them and then he monetized them. This is why reactions to him are so polarized. A person operating from stage green hears cruelty, misogyny, and emotional immaturity. A person operating from red hears clarity, permission, and relief. A person operating from orange hears motivation and strategy. And a person operating from yellow just sees a developmental signal. He is saying the same thing to all of his audiences, but we all hear something different. Andrew Tate is not the endpoint of masculinity. He is just a rebound effect created by accelerated cultural evolution without proper societal integration. So let's talk about God, strength, and why this worldview makes sense at this particular stage. Andrew Tate, he frequently talks about fearing God and about strength being the highest virtue. This is one of the most confusing aspects for people watching him from later stages of consciousness because the behavior that accompanies these statements does not look compassionate, humble, or loving. From a spiral dynamics perspective, this confusion dissolves once you understand that God means something different at each stage of development. At stage blue, God is moral law. God represents order, rules, obedience, and authority. Strength is defined as discipline, restraint, and loyalty to a higher code. Humility is central, and you submit yourself to something greater than your ego. At stage orange, the achiever stage, God becomes optional or symbolic. Truth is discovered through reason, science, and results. Strength is competence, intelligence, and achievement. God may exist, but success is the proof. At stage green, God becomes love, compassion, interconnectedness, and empathy. Strength is emotional intelligence, care for others, and inclusion. Power is softened in favor of harmony. But Andrew Tate is operating primarily from stage red, and at stage red, God is something very specific. At stage red, God is power, consequence, and hierarchy. God is not primarily about love or morality. God is about dominance, survival, and punishment. God is the ultimate authority that enforces strength and destroys all weakness. So when Andrew says he fears God, he's not being deceptive, he's just being developmentally consistent. Fear of God at red means fear of failing in the hierarchy, fear of losing dominance, fear of becoming weak, irrelevant, or vulnerable in a hostile world. God becomes the cosmic enforcer of strength, and this is why compassion does not naturally emerge from the stage red worldview. Compassion requires safety, and at red, safety has not been established yet. At red, the nervous system is still operating under the assumption that the world is a dangerous place, it's extremely competitive, and it is unforgiving, and strength is not a value, it's a survival requirement. And this is why Andrew places such extreme emphasis on being strong, winning, dominating, and never appearing weak. Weakness at red is not just unattractive, it is existentially threatening. And from this lens, his behavior isn't hypocrisy, it's just coherence with the limited stage of consciousness. The issue is not that his worldview is wrong, the issue is that it is incomplete. Later stages do not erase strength, they integrate that strength. Blue refines strength into discipline. Orange channels strength into skill and mastery. Green softens strength with empathy. Yellow integrates strength into service of the whole system. Andrew Tate still hasn't demonstrated this integration. His strength serves to protect his identity rather than being responsible for it. And this is why he speaks about God but doesn't embody humility. Humility only emerges once power no longer needs to be proven. And at red, power must be constantly displayed or it feels like it's going to disappear. Understanding this doesn't mean you're endorsing stage red. It just means that you're recognizing the worldview that it comes from and why this resonates with people who feel unsafe, humiliated, or disempowered. And it also points to the deeper invitation of this very moment. The evolution of masculinity, it's not about eliminating strength, it's about making strength safe. And this only happens when red is integrated, not denied. Now let's take a break and talk about Andrew Tate's response video, because this is where spiral dynamics becomes more observational than theoretical, okay? The first major pattern I saw was how he repeatedly minimizes the meaning of his loss. He insists that the fight does not define him, that it ultimately doesn't matter, and that external factors are more important than the outcome. And at the surface level, this sounds like resilience, but at a developmental level, this is the red stage identity defense. At red, losing is not feedback. Losing threatens status, safety, and your self-worth. So your nervous system reduces the meaning of the event to prevent an identity collapse. And that's exactly what he's doing. And this isn't conscious manipulation. It's his automatic regulation that he is not aware of. And this isn't unique to Andrew Tate. You see this pattern everywhere. For example, when someone gets laid off and then he starts immediately explaining why the job was meaningless, or someone who fails publicly and reframes the rules of success so the failure doesn't seem to count. Someone ends a relationship and they insist that they never cared about that other person. Someone at stage orange would ask, what went wrong and how could I improve? Someone at stage blue would examine responsibility and discipline. Someone at stage green would acknowledge emotional impact and then start processing the grief. Red minimizes everything because if this loss matters, survival feels threatened. The second pattern I saw is the sustained reassertion of dominance through his own language. Even after losing physically, the video is filled with verbal certainty, hierarchy, and self-validation. This is how stage red compensates when physical dominance is interrupted. The latest neuroscience research on threat response shows that when your identity is threatened, people increase verbal output, certainty, and absolutist language. Silence feels unsafe, reflection feels like surrender, and talking becomes a way to reclaim control over that environment. This explains not only the content of the video, but the length of it. The duration itself functions as a regulation. The longer the dominance signal is maintained, the more the nervous system settles. The third pattern is how criticism is framed as coming from weak or inferior people. Disagreement is dismissed rather than examined. Critics are labeled as irrelevant instead of engaging with the critics. At stage red, hierarchy must be protected. If criticism is allowed to land, dominance collapses, so it must be disqualified before it can even be processed. Blue would compare criticism to a moral code. Orange would evaluate it as feedback. Green would explore the emotional layer beneath it, but red rejects it outright to preserve its own status. If you put all these things together, you could see that his response video, it's not about growth, but about excuses, and it's about regulating his own state of being through his own power. And once you see this, his behavior becomes predictable rather than shocking. So even though we said a lot of negative things about red, the problem is not about red energy. The problem is unintegrated red energy. Healthy red integration means owning your own power without being owned by the power itself. When you integrate your red, you can assert boundaries without being cruel, feel anger without exploding, compete without humiliating others, and lose without your identity collapsing. Unintegrated red must prove strength constantly. Integrated red doesn't. This distinction is the gateway to a higher level of consciousness and a higher level of development. A powerful contrast for Andrew is Jocko Willink, because he represents what happens when red is integrated instead of idolized. Jocko clearly developed through stage red. Combat, hierarchy, aggression, and life or death stakes shaped his nervous system, but he didn't just stay there because early in his military career, power meant dominance and command. Later, power became responsibility. If a mission failed, he didn't blame circumstances or subordinates, he took ownership of it, and that is a massive developmental shift. When Jocko talks about failure, he talks about one word: good. That word signals integration. Loss is no longer danger. Loss is more information. You could see this evolution in multiple areas of his life. In leadership, he emphasizes decentralized command instead of authoritarian control. In fitness, discipline replaces ego. In business, consistency matters more than dominance. And in conversations, he listens a lot more than he speaks. Jocko does not need to continually prove his strength. It is assumed. Andrew Tate uses power to feel safe, but Jocko puts the power in service of something greater than himself, and that's the difference between red possession and red integration. So what does this mean for all of us? This isn't about choosing heroes or villains, it's about developmental literacy. Most people operate at multiple stages depending on their stress levels. You might be green in relationships, orange at work, and red when your identity feels threatened, and spiral dynamics gives us the awareness without having any shame around it. You cannot transcend what you have not integrated. If this video helped you see Andrew Tate differently, not as a hero or villain, but as a transitional signal, that is the work of the Rainbow Pill Project. If you want more analysis like this, subscribe. If you want the foundation for this lens, start with the Spiral Dynamics overview video and then come back here. And if you want to expand this conversation, drop me a comment below and I will see you all in the next video.